So it just made me crazy that these really smart people were making huge like mistakes, some of which caused them marriages or cost them their career or their
Yeah.
health. And it made me curious why people didn't listen to their intuition. And I reflected
Mm.
back on my very traditional metaphysical training and thought, well, no wonder nobody wants to do that. Like nobody wants to like go through the, 8 gates of whatever to reach. I'm like, there has to be like an easier way to do this. And so I developed kind of an easier way. And then I just kind of started teaching classes. And in the beginning, they were super metaphysical, like napping with your higher self was like the first class I ever taught. And it was about meditating for people who don't like to meditate. And then I was in a business course because I just didn't know anything about business, not really. And in that course, the guy said, you have to quantify intuition or you're just only on the pathway to being a famous psychic. And I knew I didn't want that. And so I came up with a way to train people and then name that kind of work. And that was 2012. So that was, really about
And then
13 years
what did
ago.
you name it then? How did you
I
name
called it
it?
the intuitive blueprint.
Okay.
So I came up with like a 36 question test that anybody could take. And then it would tell you how your intuition worked from my perspective and all the people I had talked to and the 1,000 readings I had already done at that point.
Hello, my extraordinary women friends. Today's conversation is about something so many of us need to hear: trusting ourselves and allowing support to elevate us. As women, we often take on the weight of the world, but what if receiving support was actually the key to unlocking our greatest potential? I am thrilled to welcome Shoshanna French to the show. She believes that nothing extraordinary is accomplished alone, and today we will explore the power of self-trust and how to strengthen it, and why receiving support is essential, not a weakness. Shoshanna helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs develop deep, unwavering self-trust so they can build bold, intuitive decisions without hesitation, overthinking, or burnout. This is a conversation about owning your power, stepping into your leadership, and realizing that you don't have to do it all alone. Let's dive in. Let's meet Shoshanna French. Well, welcome to Extraordinary Women Radio, Shoshanna. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you. Other than the times we've seen each other in person, like this kind of conversation, I don't think we've ever done. So
We
I'm
haven't,
just
and that's
excited to
like
have a one-on-one with you.
exactly. You and I run into each other at different events that we go to, but it's like I don't know all of your story, and that's one of the things I always loved to start with is just diving into what your story is and how you got to the place doing the work that you're doing today. So let's just start there.
Yeah. When I was in college, I was studying stuff, but I didn't totally know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And a friend of mine was like, I have to take you to this bookstore. And I went to school in like a little cow town in northern Colorado. For people who are familiar with it, Greeley. It's
Yep.
much bigger now, but when I went there in 1994, it was very, very small, like
Hmm.
10,000 people. And then when students were there, another 15,000. And
We used to
so,
go
like,
cruise. We used to go cruise Greeley because I grew up out on the plains out in that direction. So when we'd go to the big Greeley to go cruise.
oh my God. Okay, good. Well, we used to go to Fort Collins because Greeley was, I grew up in, Denver. So I was like, oh my gosh, there was like nothing here. So my friend was like, I need to take you to this bookstore. And I was like, all right. So we go to this bookstore and only in Greeley, 8th Avenue, 8th Street. They intersect in like this little pedestrian area. And she walks me into this bookstore and it's called Kaleidoscope. And it's a metaphysical bookstore, which I hadn't spent much time in prior because of my upbringing. You don't really go in bookstores when you're a fundamental Christian. And the owner walked up to me and she said, there you are. And I was like, oh, my friend must have told her about me. So, fast forward, that woman then became one of my mentors. And the other women, I called them like my grandmother and mother, college mothers. And they basically tutored me for 5 years while I kind of finished school in the world of metaphysics. And so
Wow.
they gave me
And
books
your
and
friend probably didn't even tell him you were coming. She probably just knew you were meant to be there.
yeah, she said she had had a dream. She called it Source. She was like, Source came to me in a dream and told me that a young woman would come in and I would recognize her by her freckles and her red hair. So that's how she knew it was me. And
Oh,
she was
wow.
a lovely, yeah, Rosemary. She's a lovely woman. And between her and a few other women, Donna and Wendy, they trained me for 5 years. And They would give me books. And so I learned all about metaphysics from old school metaphysicians, which, for those who know what that means, awesome. But if you don't know what I mean by that, old school metaphysicians, the belief is that the way you unlock kind of knowledge is through, let's be real, tedious and long practices. And so I did a lot of meditating that was very challenging to me. I read a lot. I asked a lot of questions and I studied. And then through that, their belief is like you unlock these different levels of consciousness. So
Yeah.
then I left college and went off to, the wide world to be an adult. And I found personal transformation and kind of put aside metaphysics. And so I started doing this transformational work. And in 2005, I found myself like in a business group. And really, it was a money group. So I thought I was going to learn about money. But in the first week of being in the coaching program, the woman's like, everyone before the end of this coaching group is going to start a business. What? I was like, what are you talking about? And so everybody already had something in mind. Some people in the group already had businesses, so they were going to start another one. And I was like, I don't even know what I would do. And so this woman, Lori, and I had this long conversation. And she said, what about playing music? Because I was a singer, songwriter. And at the time I was doing open mics. She's like, you could sell your songs. And I was like, okay. She said, you also are a writer. That's what I got my degree in. She's like, you could do some writing and get paid for that. Oh, okay. And she goes, what about that thing you do with cards? And I was like, tarot cards? She's like, yeah, be a psychic. So I started all three at once. And I was like, well, let's see what happens. So I got some songs put on some people's albums and made some money doing that. And then I did some writing. And both of those things were fun, but I didn't want to turn those into a business. But the psychic thing was going really well. Like I hand cards out a little bit like, Girl Scouts. Hi, have you ever had a psychic reading? Do you want a reading? Here's my card. Like every single person, just like Girl Scouts do with Girl Scout cookies.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to build, and it was pretty slow in the beginning because I had a full-time job. But eventually, like I went to the world's greatest marketing seminar, which was like a multi-day, multi-speaker course, and I read some books. This was like in 2008. And then as, things happen,
Mm-hmm.
I had this like break in my business. Like I got an opportunity to be in the Denver Post and I was on the front page of the sports section. Yes, the sports section. Only this would happen to me. And it was Psychic Eye on Sports. And it was
Oh my
me talking
goodness.
about, yeah, it was me doing psychic predictions about every major sport team and college teams in Colorado. And how that came to be is I got a phone call from this guy at the Denver Post. He said, Santa Claus is sick. Normally after Christmas, like on New Year's Eve, we put out this paper and it's been a thing for a long time. Santa does his predictions on sports and sports talk, but the guy who does it is sick. So would you be willing to do it? And I was going to say no, but my intuition was like, go for it. So I said
Yeah.
yes. And that kind of launched me in a big way. So then I was
Wow.
on TV and then I was on the radio and I went from having like, I don't know, 10 sessions a month to 10 a week. So then I had to figure out how to take credit cards and I needed a better website and I needed one place to meet people instead of meeting people at random coffee
Yeah.
shops. And
Yeah.
so we moved our bedroom down to the basement in the house my husband now, but boyfriend then lived in and turned that into my office so I could meet people in person. And that kind of big time launched the business. And then over time, I just started to notice this thing, which was people were making really crazy, dumb mistakes, super smart people. And I'm like, and then in the conversation, in the reading, they would say something like, well, I mean, I knew better, but, I didn't trust myself, or I knew better, but, whatever. So it just made me crazy that these really smart people were making huge, like, mistakes, some of which caused them marriages or cost them their career or their
Yeah.
health. And it made me curious why people didn't listen to their intuition. And I reflected back
Mm.
on my very traditional metaphysical training and thought, well, no wonder nobody wants to do that. Like nobody wants to like go through the, 8 gates of whatever to reach. I'm like, there has to be like an easier way to do this. And so I developed kind of an easier way. And then I just kind of started teaching classes. And in the beginning, they were super metaphysical, like napping with your higher self was like the first class I ever taught. And it was about meditating for people who don't like to meditate. And then I was in a business course because I just didn't know anything about business, not really. And in that course, the guy said, you have to quantify intuition or you're just only on the pathway to being a famous psychic. And I knew I didn't want that.
Uh-huh.
So I came up with a way to train people and then name that kind of work. And that was 2012. So that was, really about
And then
13 years
what did
ago.
you name it then? How did you
I
name
called it
it?
the intuitive blueprint.
Okay.
So I came up with like a 36 question test that anybody could take, and then it would tell you how your intuition worked from my perspective and all the people I had talked to and the 1,000 readings I had already done at that point. And then I took that, and then my very first course I offered from that intuitive blueprint was called Mastering Your Intuition. And I taught that to like 250 people. And one of those people was a big business CEO in Toronto. And he said, do you ever mentor people? And I didn't have any idea what he meant. And I was like, what does that mean? And he said, well, like specifically business people for applying intuition in business, because that's kind of what we did in Mastering Intuition. And I was like, oh, that's true. He's like, but I need it to be specific for business. Can you do that? And I was like, sure, why not? And so then I kind of just invented this whole other thing called mentoring. And that was like what rolled me into coaching. And then all the rest happened,
Yeah.
fireside chat at Google, Washington Post, panels, being on a think tank for almost 2 years. Like it just kind of like rolled into people who would be in mentoring would then say, if you ever thought of X, you should be here in this conversation. And I found myself in all these different places. And working with all those leaders, it had me recognize that one, the value of intuition from a practical perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and that
Mm-hmm.
not everybody wants to do that old school metaphysical, hard, laborious, let's be real, kind of like slow paced way of learning how to connect. And I think the metaphysical way is beautiful, but in modern times, we have to talk the language that lands for people who, our life is so fast. And the women
Right.
who taught me, they learned their gifts and practiced and did their kind of pathway in the mid 70s when I was born.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it needed an upgrade.
Yeah.
And
And
it
that's what
didn't.
you brought to it. And being able to really make it apply to people's lives in that very real way, whether it's through their businesses or, looking at it through that lens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's how I ended up here. And of course, I'm going through like as we do, right? As women who are living extraordinary lives, we go through a lot of pivots and
Oh,
changes and
totally. Mm-hmm.
transformations. And
Mm-hmm.
I went through kind of a big transformation over the last 2 years or almost really 3 years. And so like now that's translating to a big change and pivot in the business and who I am in the business and who I want to work with and that kind of thing. So
So
that's
that's happening now or that's happened over the last 2 to 3 years?
the transformation started in May of 2022 when my husband had an accident at work.
Mm-hmm.
And for anybody who's ever been a long-term caregiver for somebody who's had something like that happen, it changes your perspective on life. And
Yeah.
um, just to say it in a way that I think probably will translate to everybody, sometimes the ways that we know to work with when life is lifing, at some
Mm-hmm.
point they stop working and then you have to like go get some new tools. And I
Right.
have a lot of tools, but the tools I had were not tooling it. You know what I mean? So I had to go
Yeah.
find some new ways of one, engaging with myself, two, engaging with being a caregiver, but also then, trauma from childhood around taking care of my parents as a kid and like that kind of brought up all that stuff. So that kind of led me on this, certainly not on my bingo card for pre-50, I will tell you, but led me on this kind of journey of dealing with some stuff that I needed to. And what I realized is that I wanted to do different kinds of work than I was doing and what I was known for. And
Mm-hmm.
it also just had me own some stuff that I hadn't owned, which was people know me for the tools that I teach, which is,
Right.
how do you tap into your intuition? But that's not the whole story. And
Yeah.
I've never really talked about the transformational aspects of the work I do and what are the results people get out of that. And so I just really, like, I had to deal with the imposter syndrome and all my junk before I could get myself to the place to own it fully. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Totally, totally.
Yeah.
And so what was it that you fully decided to own? What was the the gist of that?
Yeah. One, that you can't do anything on your own.
Mm,
That to believe that I was just talking about this earlier today, actually, is that we are trained to be self-sufficient. For sure, women of my generation, I was born in 76. I was definitely a latchkey kid. We were definitely trained that being independent was like the best outcome of a childhood. It's like if you can take care of yourself, then make it easier on your parents, then your parents have done their job. Right? If you can like move it through challenges without getting any external support. However, when I reflect on my life, I have never done anything really on my own. I have had people in my life supporting me, even if it wasn't clear that they were doing it, whether they were a lesson that I had to learn or they were there as like just a support. So that was probably the very first thing. We don't do things on our own. The second thing was, and what I really had to own is that I'm really good at what I do.
mm-hmm,
And what I do is not for everyone. And
mm-hmm,
so owning that, it took deconstructing the being a people pleaser. You know what I mean? Like
mm-hmm, yep.
my training is to be pleasing and good for everyone. I am really good at being liked, and I can chameleon myself and get along with just about everybody. However, when you own your power and own who you are authentically, you are going to um, irritate some people, and you have to be okay with that.
It kind of push the edges a bit, right?
Yeah,
Of
yeah.
what you're showing up in. I love that so much. So let's start with this part of not doing things on your own. Can you share a moment when the right people just showed up for you and changed everything on your path? You've already given us a couple of examples of that, but is there something that really just stands out?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. I mean, really, like, especially in the work that I did, that I'm
Hmm.
like, there are lots of them. The one right at the current moment that's like striking me a bit is
Hmm.
when I was in college, getting ready to leave college, there was this woman, Joanna, and she and I became friends. And she was the first person I'd ever met who, without calling herself like an intuitive or a psychic, she could read people. Like,
Hmm.
and she helped people by having conversations and then having them buy jewelry that she had like collected and like that. And one time she started sharing with me about a program she had done. And she was like, you need to do this program. And she just kept talking to me about it for 6 months and she would not let up. And then I kept telling her, like, oh, that sounds really good. I should register for that. And I came back to her booth one time and she said, if you don't have your checkbook and you're not registering, you should leave. And I was like, whoa, no one had ever been like so with
Yeah,
me like that.
yeah.
And I was like, I don't have my checkbook. It's back at my apartment. She goes, great. You should turn around and go. When do you have class? If you have time to walk back to your apartment and back here, I don't have a car. Okay. So I turned around. I walked back to my apartment. I grabbed my checkbook. I came back and I registered. And of course, later on, I found out she had had a dream. This is like a theme here. She had had a
Yeah,
dream, and in her dream, she saw me working for the company. So she knew I had to do the program. Otherwise, how was I going to end up working for the company?
right.
And I did. I ended up working for the company for 2 years. And if that
Yeah,
hadn't have happened, I wouldn't have met my husband, who is the single most transformative relationship I've ever had in my life.
yeah.
And I would not have met that community, which is most of the women I know now. Quite a few of them, probably about half of my closest and dearest friends, came from that work, from that company. So,
Mm,
that's a pretty
yeah.
impactful,
Moment for sure.
yeah,
For sure. So that trusting ourself, I mean, how we trust ourselves is so key and it's a big theme in your work, right? It's like how do we really deepen our self-trust and intuition that, as we show up and living today?
yeah. Well, I think it's always reverse engineering.
Hmm.
So instead of focusing on how do I trust, what I often have people focus on is where do you trust yourself already?
Hmm.
Because that's a little bit easier to grasp.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so I ask people, like, where do you feel competent and confident already?
Uh-huh.
Whether it's like, I know you love horses. So whether it's like
Yeah.
with horses or it's some people, they're like, oh, well, I feel competent and confident as a mother. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
great. And so then I'll have them focus on, well, what's that feeling in the body? What's that
Yeah.
experience? as you feel that. And then what I tell them is when you are trusting your intuition, the feeling is the same.
Yeah.
So then we're connecting it to something that's familiar. And so like that's
Hmm.
always the first step. And then the second is, how does your intuition work? Like how does it actually work? And
Yeah.
because you have to know what the, what is the anatomy of intuition and what are the mechanics of your unique anatomy.
Right. Because
And then
everybody's
what
going to have a different way to tap into their intuition, right?
Absolutely. Well, we all have different personalities, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but we have to take that into consideration. And we have different spiritual beliefs. So, I've trained all different kinds of people in many different religions. And if you believe that God talks to you, then we have to have that be part of how
Right.
you connect. But if you
Right.
don't believe in that, and instead you believe, like my friend does, that horses speak to us,
Uh-huh.
she does work like healing work with horses.
Yep.
Meaning not that she heals horses, but horses work with her to heal
To
other
heal
people.
people. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, to heal people. Yeah. Then that has to play into how your intuition works. So it's,
Yeah. You know, the
you just,
horses are absolutely what brought me into the world of any, what I would say, spiritual um, being at all, was the world of horses, because I could find my way there so easily.
huh,
I didn't have a spiritual bone in my body when I left the corporate world 16 years ago. Um, but it was the horses that helped me like start to trust things differently, right? To feel things differently. And they had been an intimate part of my life forever. And when I went into the world of equine guided coaching, it was like, oh, this is magical. And I see how this really unfolds like this. So I totally agree with that. It's like finding your avenue into the world of trusting that intuition.
what was the name of the first horse that you worked with in the equine coaching?
Oh gosh. So I had a horse, that my horse named Sugary, like the Grateful Dead song Sugary. Um, um, she was the one that actually helped me go, aha, I'm not supposed to go back to the corporate world. It was like a moment that in my life where I was like, oh, I'm not supposed to go back to the corporate world. I'm supposed to go do something different. And within a month, I was in Northern California doing training under a woman that had really pioneered a lot of that work. So,
Very cool.
yeah, it was really, really cool. So, but we find our avenues in there, right? And I think that, spirituality is a big part of my work today from the perspective of, I like to weave together soul and strategy with my work for my clients, because I think that's how we do business differently. And I would have never gone there, you know, 20 years ago. That would have never been the pathway that I would have gone there. But I learned along the way, like all these things showed up just in the right ways. And even that teacher way back then, it's like we have these people drop in our lives that are
Yes,
meant to, like you've been talking about here. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It,
So who have been some of your most influential women in your life, and how have they really shaped you into the leader that you are today?
um, I'm thinking of four right at the moment. One is my
Mm-hmm.
grandmother, my mom's mom. Her
Mm-hmm.
name was Lucille. Um, but I just called her grandma. And she was someone who could fit anywhere. Like she's the one who introduced me to opera and really my love of
Mm-hmm.
music. But she's also the person who taught me how to hike and pick
Mm-hmm.
like pick flowers in the wild or herbs in the wild. Like she could do anything. Like
Yeah.
she could, chop wood, hike, but also look totally at home in a ball gown at a fancy gala. I mean, that's just who she was. And there was
Yeah.
something about like being the full expression of who she was that was such an inspiration. And as I've gotten older, I'm 48 now, I think about like what is the fullest expression of who we are. Like that's I think part of living an extraordinary life. And so
Mm-hmm.
she for sure is a huge influence. My mom loves to read and she loves people and she is endlessly curious. And rather than being annoyed at any other 2 year old, that natural thing that like most 2 year olds kind of like grow out of where they go, but why? But why? Well, what tell me more. I just never grew out of that. My mom did not get bored with me. She would say, go look at the encyclopedias in grandpa's office. And so we'll go look it up. And then when you find it, come back. And she knew me well enough that if you sent me to the encyclopedias, I wouldn't come back. Like I would be lost in the encyclopedias for a hot minute. So I credit her with my love of like learning and being curious and just genuine love of people, like genuine
Yeah.
love of people. Another influential woman for sure, just like recently, is my friend Jen Koken. And she's
Hmm.
somebody who we've known each other a really long time. I think 23 years, I think is what
Oh
we said.
gosh, I didn't realize
But
that.
yeah, for a very, very long time. And one of the things I love about Jennifer Koken is she is tenacious. And when I met her, she was working for Greenpeace, and she was running someone's political um, like fundraising, and like she's just somebody who has been like a million people in her career,
Mhm.
and she's done every single one of them really, really well. Um, and what I would say about her, and the thing that is like I want to emulate and why she's a woman I really respect, is she is someone who, when you have her attention, you have her undivided attention. And I find that that is a rare quality,
Mhm.
like that
Mhm.
experience where I was saying this to a therapist the other day. I was like, for people who do what we do, you do the same. You coach people in groups and one on one and consult, right? Is that we recognize when people are distracted
Yeah.
because we
Yeah.
listen in a different way. So when we
Right.
work with practitioners, there is this desire we have to be like seen and to have the feeling like there is nothing else to do and nowhere else to be for that person than listening to us and being with us. And Jen Koken has that gift. She's had that since I
Mm.
met her 22 years ago, and it is a really, really special one. And then the last like really influential person is someone who's a friend but was a client. Her name is Omalade Bell. And when I met her, um, she was a founder of a nonprofit called Black Girl Ventures.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
she had started that in her living room because she had noticed this statistic when she was doing work as a Google digital coach, which was Black and brown women were the fastest uh, like population of people starting companies, but they couldn't get funding.
Mm.
And so she was like, let's change that, like for
Yeah.
real. So
Yeah.
I think she gathered like 15 women at her home in her living room, and everybody brought $100. And then every person in that group made a pitch. And then whoever won got the pot, which was $1,500. And then it like kind of grew from there. And last year in 2024, I'd probably be saying the number wrong, but she brought in $5 million in partnerships, and her company, her nonprofit, has created $30 million in revenue for these companies who've received, funding, and produced like 100,000 jobs or something, like one person from a living room. And so she inspires me because what her and I always talk about is like, you never know about that one action that you'll take and then what the outcome of that will be. It's just a reminder that it's taken from, she started that in 2016. We're
Mhm.
now 9 years later, and what she's been able to accomplish, but it took 9 years to get there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those are the most influential women. Lou, my grandma, my mom for sure, Jen Koken, and then my friend Omalade Bell.
I love that. I love all those stories. And when you think about how your gifts have shown up to support and guide them and then guide your clients. I mean, so when you just bring your work into the world of business a little bit for us so that we can really envision about how you're helping your clients with those intuition gifts and the gifts of who you are.
So what I find is that kind of along the what we've been talking about so far, we don't do this on our own. How do we trust our own intuition? And then how do we, in the moment, trust it? So if you are in business, most of the visionary women that I work with find themselves in very high stake decisions.
Hmm.
Whether they're like the VP in a financial company or they're the CEO of their own company, there gets this point in leadership where every decision you make feels like it holds a ton of weight. And that moment where, oh, like I don't want to make the wrong decision. And a lot of
Mm.
women I work with are very successful, very driven, very ambitious, very smart. And this
Hmm.
experience they're having in that current moment that that they find me or I find them, or however that works, they're experiencing something they haven't experienced in a very, very long time, which is the sense of overanalyzing their decisions, relying too much on logic, and then even after they make decisions, experiencing doubt about what they chose.
Okay.
And so, how I take intuitive decision making into the world of business is we first sort of talk about what is intuition. Are you already using it and not recognizing that you're using it? And then we get down to what I would call like the brass tacks of being in business. Like, what is your why for being in business?
Yeah.
What's the outcome that you've wanted? Why are you even doing it? Whether it's your own organization or someone else's. And then I connect
Mm-hmm.
the dots. How does intuition play into business? And that's sort of like the first part of what I always do with clients. And then we get down into like the inner work. Why are you not trusting yourself? And that part of the work I do sometimes is the most amount of sessions when I'm coaching people one on one,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes what's coming up is old stuff from when they were teenagers or from the very first career they had before they left corporate, like you did, and went on to like their own business.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, those stories run deep.
they really do. They really
Yeah.
do. And
Yeah.
they like don't feel related until the same exact experience in the body or thought comes back and they just haven't connected that that's why it's coming up. So and then the very last part, so it's sort of like what's intuition, how does it work, all the tools for that. Then what's the inner work? And then the last part of how I connected to business is we say, what is intuitive leadership? So how do you
Yeah.
connect your intuition, recognition of who you really are, and then how do you bring that forward into your leadership? So as you make decisions, which as a leader, whether you own your own company or you're a leader in somebody else's
Yeah.
organization, every decision you make does matter. They do. That
Oh,
there is some
yeah.
reality to that. And
Yeah.
you're making a lot of them.
Yeah.
And so how do you apply intuition to your leadership so that
Yeah.
in
I love
every
it so
moment,
much.
I do too. Uh,
I had a boss at one point say to me, so years ago, I don't care what your intuition says. We need, and so, and then he continued the sentence on. And that has stuck with me forever and ever and ever. And I don't believe that, I do everything in my business through intuition. I do so much, it's like I'm always bringing intuition into what I'm doing. And so being able to help women step into trusting and hearing and making that decision and finding the faith in that decision because they have this intuitive hit is a really powerful gift that you're giving to your clients.
Thank you. I The part that is most striking to me, and it's the part that is part of my own journey, is that how logic is of equal importance to me, because logic is important. It's how you solve problems. Intuition is not
Yeah.
for solving problems. So how do you combine this intuitive recognition, understanding, insight into either a person, a team, potential contract, a circumstance, a situation? And then
Yeah.
once you have that awareness, then how do you apply your logic to solve the problem?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that for me, like that, like juicy kind of combination is what allows people to then trust themselves, because all of us are different. Like I'm a really logical person, and it's a surprise to many who I then end up coaching, or places where I've spoken, or big
Mm-hmm.
leaders that I've worked with. They're like, you're so grounded and like practical. And I'm like, yeah, because intuition doesn't require you to not be grounded. It doesn't
Right.
require you to,
You don't need to be
yeah,
all airy.
right. I'm
You
not
can
going
be
to
very,
ask you to
very
sing
grounded.
Kumbaya unless
Yeah.
you want to. And then I'll join in because
Yeah.
I know that song. My mom's a hippie,
Yeah.
but it's not a requirement. Like we can talk about strategy, we can talk about
Yeah.
your P&L, we can talk about this possibility of the new product that you want to launch, but before we're going to check with what's happening in the market, and before
Yeah.
that we're going to check and see what your intuition is communicating about, is this in alignment with your why in
Yeah.
your business or not? Like all of
Yeah.
those things can work together in a beautiful orchestra.
So
And
agree. I mean,
that,
this is why
that to
you
me.
and I are so aligned, right? I mean, because we both have that, and it's like, and I totally get that. It's like trusting and being in that space of hearing and listening, and then being able to put strategy alongside of it. I mean, that is the power of that,
It really
and
is.
being able to bring both to that. So I've heard you say you're do no harm but take no crap, and I love that. What does that mean to you in practice? And how do you really help women embody that?
Well, the first thing is recognizing, I think, the difference between being nice and being kind.
Mm-hmm.
So doing no harm looks like harm is something that lasts well beyond the engagement or interaction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Someone not liking what you say or someone being uncomfortable with what you say is not the same thing as harm.
Mm-hmm.
So
Very
I
good.
really,
Yeah.
what I train women often, what comes up, and I imagine the same happens for you, is sometimes we just need permission to speak our truth,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that that truth may not be everyone's truth, but it's our truth. And it's important that the people who view us as a leader and that we are leading recognize what our truth as a leader is. And
Yeah.
sometimes in the expression of that, it might tick some people off, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
knowing that ticking people off is not harm. Harm is saying something like, you've never been good enough for this job. I don't know why I hired you in the first place. That's harm,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Being,
one of those things that carries through for a long
yeah,
time,
and
right?
sticks in their head
Yeah.
for forever, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but but being direct and being open and being honest is saying something like, let's have a conversation about how this position and maybe the culture of our company might not be a good fit for you. What do you think about that? But like
Right.
that's a
Right.
truth, right? Like that's
Yeah.
a very different engaged conversation than why did I ever hire you? Like that
Right.
kind of thing.
Right.
As
Yeah.
leaders, it's important that we do no harm. It is really, really important.
So good. And you think about just the day and age we're living in right now, what an
Lord.
important lesson. I mean, it's like for all of us. And it's even, even as a leader of my community, I pause and I think, okay, what are the things I'm meant to be talking about and saying right now? And I can't not I can't be quiet about it right now, right? I have things I need to say about what's happening in our world right now. And I think it's really important, but not doing it with harm, but doing it with owning what your truth is in the moment is a really good lesson for all of us right now.
Yeah. And it's not easy because there are times when we are angry.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes, and that's part of why it's like my philosophy is like
Yeah.
the practice is, can you stay grounded enough and present enough, self-aware enough that when you are having an emotional reaction, that you have permission. Will Smith said this thing, him and his wife, he came on Red Table Talk, which is like a show that Jada Pinkett Smith, her daughter Willow, and then her mom do together. I don't know if you
Okay.
ever watched them or not. It's really,
No.
really good.
Mm-mm.
But it was like a show that started on Facebook and then spread. But one time they had Will on and they were talking about anger and
Mm-hmm.
how what happens in anger? What do you do in relationships when anger? And it's this whole thing, do no harm, right? So what
Right.
he would say, and this was like a practice that they got from someone, I can't remember who he said it was from, but he'd say, right now in this moment, I can't be the man that I promised you I was going to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk away. And when I can be the man I promised I could be, then I'll come back.
Mm,
And so
that's
I
a
think
really
of
good
that
one.
yeah, it's so good. So I think of that sometimes. I think of in engagement, sometimes people say things
Yeah.
that uh, elicit a very strong emotional response for me, and I don't want to do harm. Then the
Right.
second half of that saying, which is take no crap, there are the things that people are saying in that moment are actually, in fact, causing harm and they need
Right.
to be addressed. And
Right.
so those are the times when I am willing to like deal with it and be okay with whatever comes out of my mouth because the things that those people are saying they don't recognize they're actually doing. That's what I mean by taking it.
By owning, like really standing up for something that you
Yeah,
believe in.
yeah. There are certain things that happen in front of me that irritate me, but I can take a pause
Yeah.
because in that moment it's just someone being uh, like irresponsible or irritating,
Right.
but I don't relate to what they're saying as harmful. And then there are times when
Right.
people say things that are like genuinely harmful that need to
Right.
be front and center addressed. And so
Yeah.
my husband gave me this poster that said, I'm a lot of I wish I had it up in here. I don't. I have it up in my meditation room and it's like I'm a whole lot of peace, love, and go F yourself. And that's like, to me, that's this
That
thing.
is
That's
that,
the do
right?
no harm and take no crap, like
Right.
let's 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 be more present to what actually causes harm. And so not everybody
Mm,
has the same philosophy as me. So,
yeah.
and I know
Yeah.
that because I had definitely experienced the like lack of that first presence of harm, of what harm is.
Yeah. 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 Well, and it's good to, I mean, it's good for all of us to check where we're at and, pause and where, how am I responding to this in the mix of all of this? So I love it so much. I love this. I think it's just really pertinent right now. So where can our listeners learn more about you, Shoshana?
I am very easy to find because I've been around a long time. If you want to watch any podcast I've been on, you can just type Shoshanna French podcast and you'll find, different ones I've been on. But the easiest way to find me is you can go right to LinkedIn. My name is Shoshanna French on LinkedIn. That has the current kind of iteration of business about leadership. You can also find me on Instagram, Shoshanna French. The nice thing about my name is there's not anybody else named that
Yep.
name. I'm pretty easy to find.
It's you and me both. We both have that one,
Yes,
that
we
good
do. We have
advantage.
the unusual name club.
Yeah. Yeah,
And then
totally.
people can always just directly contact me too. So I love
Excellent.
having conversations, and I'm a big believer in resources because, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I have been guided and supported by a lot of people. So, even if someone is not meant to be my client, I have a lot of resources that may help someone just on their journey and guide them towards what would actually help. So,
Cool. I love it. I love it. And then the final question I always close with are, what are 3 pearls of wisdom you'd like to leave with us today?
3 pearls of wisdom. One, especially women who listen to this, huge importance, permission to pause.
Yeah.
Um, Before we like jumped into our conversation, Cami and I were talking about the power of rest and how we have to listen to our bodies.
Full
Um,
disclosure, I took a nap this morning.
which I loved so much. So, permission to pause to me is that when we, especially with what's going on in the world right now, we can be in a reactive state and not
Yeah,
know it.
totally.
And it's exhausting because all of
Yeah.
us are having a lot of cognitive dissonance right now. So, how do
Mhm.
you be in that cognitive dissonance for an extended period of time? You can't, it's just too exhausting. So, permission to pause.
Yeah.
Number two, uh, joy is is like about meaning in life, and happiness is a moment to moment thing that arises. So I think
Mm.
sometimes we get confused by that. Like joy is comes from a deeper meaning. So
Yeah.
if you notice that joy is missing as like an experience in life, then the place to look is like, well, what is the reason why I'm living? Like for me, like
Mm.
for yourself. And happiness
Mhm.
is just like, because people talk a lot about like gratitude practices, and gratitude
Mhm.
practices are amazing for connecting to happiness as it arises in the moment. But joy is a deeper exploration. So I think having both
Ooh.
of those things, and that did not come from me, by the way. That pearl of wisdom came from the Book of Joy by Desmond Tutu. It was really,
Oh, I
really
love
good.
that book.
I love that book
It's
too. So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that pearl of wisdom was plucked from somebody else. And then the last thing I'll say is this, which is, uh, if you notice that you're spiritually bypassing yourself, which is super easy to do, where it's like, I should be positive, I should be positive, I should be more positive, and like shutting ourselves off from things that are upsetting, like just again, like check in with yourself about what is the one thing that you can do to make a difference? Is there someone who's affected by the things in the world that are happening? Just one person, and can you reach out to them to let them know that you love them, that you care about them, that you're there to support them if they need the support? Like, what is a thing that you could donate to? What is, how could you give your time? Because we have different resources, but like if
Right.
you look at the whole of it all at once, you're totally overwhelmed. And then you might spiritually bypass yourself to be positive about lipstick on a pig or poop on a pie. But
Mhm.
instead, what's the one thing you could do to like would actually make a difference, which just makes it
Yeah.
a little bit more like global to local, like immediate.
I like that so much. Well, Shoshana, thank you so much for sharing all your good wisdom today and sharing your stories. And it was a pleasure getting to hear more of your stories today.
Thank you for having me on. Great conversation. I appreciate you,
Y-
Cami.
I appreciate you too.